the JB Doula podcast. I'm Jessica Brown, a certified birth and postpartum doula serving families in southwestern Pennsylvania. Here we talk about all things womanhood, birth, and the childbearing years. Plenty still will apply to our other parenting journeys such as dads, trans, and non-binary friends. And today is our first book review. Henci Goer's The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth. So, disclaimer, published in 1999, still relevant today, 2021. So that's kind of the vibe we're going with here. But why I'm doing book reviews is I've been reading birth books, women's health books, postpartum, all of this stuff for the last 5 years. So I've got a backlog of books I could do reviews for. But I've also recently, as I mentioned before, started the Ancient Art Midwifery learning program. So I'm doing a midwifery study course, and this is one of the books I recommended doing. So I just finished it, so it's fresh in my mind, and I figured I would share this with you since I'm embarking on just this lifelong learning habit. And this way you kind of have a little gleaning of is this book worth it? Should I read it, add it to my list? Because I have a huge stack of books I've read. And I'm everyone should read all the books, but that's not always accessible. So this kind of gives you a synopsis, a little summary, and my general vibe and opinion on it, and to see if maybe that kind of resonates with you, that would be something that you would want to read more of. So yeah, let's get into it. Henci Goer's The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth. First and foremost, Henci Goer is our author for The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth, and she's an award-winning medical writer and birth activist. The little synopsis for this particular book of hers is that it gives a clear, concise information based on the latest medical studies, asterisks, from 1999. Goer will help you compare and contrast your various options and show you how to avoid unnecessary procedures, drugs, restrictions, and tests. So, with my little asterisk and disclaimer, yes, this was written and published in 1999, and the studies that she's drawing from, the medical literature, is from the 1980s and 1990s. Why I'm talking about this book today, in 2021, is that it's still relevant. The interventions that she's talking about, still super common today. There are hospitals that just go down the list of yep, we'll do this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and it's Henci Goer wrote in 1999 that this isn't evidence-based and that there's evidence supporting that this is harmful or ineffective. Why are we still doing this in 2021? So yes, I'm going to talk about this book from 1999. And I really like that she is a birth activist, and this is kind of her niche, is this medical writing and birth activism and making this resource accessible to the thinking woman or just the average birthing person, because medical literature can be hard to access. People will say oh, make sure you don't just read the abstract if you've ever even seen a medical journal before to know what an abstract is. And then also there's gatekeeping when it comes to information. You have to have a subscription to a lot of journal websites where you can have access to the entire medical journal and the entirety of the research done. So she provides you the summary of what she's read. She has medical literature summaries, and she draws on these completed evidence-based works to give her argument for or against, or to provide you the risks and benefits and just the evidence that supports or doesn't support a particular intervention. The easiest one to mention is the episiotomy. We don't need to be tearing women. Don't need to be cutting them. No. The birthing person can deal without being cut in their perineum. Thank you very much. That's my TED Talk. That's it. That's one of the more simple, quote-unquote simple, because we still have episiotomy. It's pretty common today. This is a trend going against it, and then there's some countries and some states where they're doing them more again, and it's just... But it's one where, across the board, there typically is very little evidence that supports it, and the wealth of information and resources and evidence that goes against it, saying, do not cut birthing people, please. So, anyways, her book, the interventions she's talking about that she's going to go over are cesareans, which I know is hot button topic for some people, and it includes elective cesareans as well as repeat cesareans and VBACs for vaginal birth after cesarean. We talk about that whole scope there. So we have cesareans, breech babies, for those breech births, come bottom first. Inducing labor, IVs. Didn't think you need to have pros and cons for that one, did you? So IVs, electronic fetal monitoring. That's the little belts they'll put on you typically to track and see how baby's heart rate is doing during a contraction. Rupturing the membranes or breaking your bag of waters. Coping with slow labor. That's one that'll get me heated. I'll try not to get ranty. I swear. I'll try my best. Pain medication, the different types, pros and cons. Episiotomy, vaginal birth after cesarean, and doulas. Me. There's evidence for me. And deciding on a doctor or a midwife. And the different types of midwives, you have options for that as well. And different doctors too. And choosing where to have your baby and much more. So it's got a nice broad spectrum of, if you're in a hospital, you'll definitely encounter a lot of these as potentialities for interventions. And a lot of what she does is not just the pros and cons of like, no, we really should lower VBAC rates. No, sorry, we should really lower cesarean rates. We want more VBAC rates. We want more women having vaginal births after cesareans. It's all around better for you. Already got all heated. I apologize. She is clear in her bias. She is coming from the get-go, this point of view of seeing a rising trend in cesarean rates, including elective cesareans, which aren't supported by the FDA, at least circa 1999. If it's different now, that's interesting, isn't it? I wonder why that would be. Money. So, she has sass in her, and I think it's coming out in me too, because I like that she's frank and to the point. She breaks down these different interventions and procedures with pros and cons, the risks and benefits, and draws from medical literature, and she makes it approachable. Like, for someone who's not accustomed to reading academic literature or medical literature, it can be really overwhelming. Like what is this? She clearly defines things. She makes it easy to digest in like little bites, of information. So it isn't this really dense, jargony, awful read. It's not. It's a really good read, and it's really informative too. What it does for me as a birth worker who is familiar with a lot of these interventions, and that they cause more problems usually, and they usually lead to more interventions, is that it's just reaffirming that, and it's showing that the things she was seeing in 1999 that motivated her to publish this book, to educate parents, so that way they knew their options going into labor, so maybe they could have a better chance of avoiding unnecessary interventions and procedures. It's just reaffirming that, like, this is still happening. This is still super important. So for me, it's like, the work is not yet done. We still have a long way to go to improving maternity care and the maternity model of care. So we want to make birth better for people, and not just better experiences, because those do have a significant psychological impact and in your feelings of being capable of parenting. But it's also, we want to improve our outcomes of like health and death. We still have high rates compared to other industrialized countries, I think is the word, because it's not really developed, but it's just the ones that have an extensive amount of money put into their medical care. We're the worst. We're still doing terribly compared to everyone else who puts the same amount of money into medical care. So she is clear in this bias that she's like, yes, like I see this rising trend in cesareans. There's all this evidence that we would like to avoid cesareans, including from the World Health Organization, UNICEF. So what can I do to help? And that's giving the information to parents so they can make informed choices for informed consent. And that's due diligence, because we are seeing, even now in 2021, a just lack of information being provided from the provider to the client or the patient or the birthing person, whichever one you would like to identify as there. And that's a problem. So she's clear on that she wants to reduce cesarean rates, and that the maternity model of care is safe and has good or better outcomes than the obstetric managed medical model of care. It was a little hodgepodge of multiple phrases for that. Typically obstetric medical model, but also this like idea of having to manage labor. as if our bodies are mechanical and need fixed, or that our bodies are dangerous and incapable, and that our babies need to be saved from our bodies, tends to be the premise of the medical model obstetric management care. I hope you can see where some of that problem would be, and then also why it's so easy to then have these providers justifying all these interventions. Because you need to be fixed, your baby needs to be saved, your body is dangerous. And I like how Henci Goer explains and talks about this aspect, because what keeps coming up throughout this whole thing is that no, more often than not, the reasoning for these interventions and procedures and even cesareans isn't about you and your body and your health and like your particular set of variables as a person and an individual. It's on the provider's philosophy on birth. Do they view birth as a natural physiological process, and that you and your body and your baby are more than capable of giving birth with hands off unless absolutely necessary because you need it? Or is it from this perspective that you're going to need help because your body is dangerous and your baby needs to be saved? It's very different, these points of view. And then the care that follows shows that, how important your birth philosophy is. You can have midwives who have a more medical philosophy of birth and who might carry a lot of fear with them. At the same time, you can have family practitioners and obstetricians who have a more mother or parent friendly, birth centric, like, yes, like, let me keep some hands off and just come in if I really need to. You have on both sides. We're seeing trends that the medical model is very prevalent with the obstetricians because they're trained in this obstetric model. And the obstetrics is this study of the complications of things that go wrong and the management of the things that go wrong. So they are doing their job. It's their specialty, is all the things that go wrong. So we have to kind of work with this framework that they also need an expansion of their understanding of birth and show that there is this other side of safe physiological birth. Whether or not you decide you would like a narcotic or not, or an epidural, you can still have a physiological birth. There's a lot in between the two. And there's a lot of potential to grow on both sides and to be able to keep in mind that it needs to be this like birthing person centric to have these better outcomes. So yes, while she goes into these and she goes into the risks and benefits of all of these things, she has a breakdown for each chapter or each type of intervention or procedure. I'm going to review them real quick because it's a book review and I was getting a little sidetracked by my passion. So she begins each chapter with an overview or critique of the mainstream belief and practice, because again, she isn't hiding her bias. She's seeing trends that are increasing, that are not evidence-based, and that are also having subsequent correlated increases in maternal and infant death rates and complications and trauma, and all of these things, just dismal outcomes for birth that we like to make better. We want to improve. We don't want to go, this is what we are now, even though there are other countries of the same like amount of money going in to their medical model who are having vastly different outcomes. They're vastly more positive. So we need to change something. So she kind of starts with this, unveils her bias, unveils kind of what the chapter's about. And she goes on to describe the procedure intervention, which I think is super important as a part of this birth activism of providing the knowledge and full disclosure so you can make an informed choice. Because often you might not know what an epidural entails. That, let's say you want one during labor. This isn't like a planned cesarean that you haven't spontaneously gone into labor beforehand. It's the one where they're most often being used. They're being used a lot in both. Anyways, in the situation in which you are already in labor and you request an epidural, you typically have to wait until you're so far progressed. So you do still need to labor without it because it has shown to slow down labor or stop it, especially if it's done earlier on. So first you'll have to wait. And then when you get it, you have to be still. During an insertion of a needle between your vertebrae into your epidural space in your spine. You have to be still for more than 10 minutes. They can take 20 minutes depending on like how experienced the provider is or how much you're moving during a contraction, because you're getting this done during contractions and you have to stay still. And then it can take more time after that for it to take effect. And there's also these chances that it might not work, or that you'll have spots of numbness or spots of like, I feel all of that right here. Or you have only one side that's numb and the other isn't, which then makes the balance of coping so much more difficult, because part of our endorphins that naturally raise up with each like level of contraction and like phase of labor is that it meets you there. If you're not adding additional things like synthetic oxytocin, your own endorphins are matching your own naturally occurring oxytocin. So that kind of gets disrupted, so that balances off. And then what you might not know is that you might need a catheter. So because you're probably not going to be able to get out of bed to use the restroom, and you probably aren't familiar with using a bedpan. And again, like culturally, we're, you wake up if you have to go pee and you go to the bathroom because we don't want bedwetting. So it can be hard, especially during like this big stressful moment of like trying to get comfortable and all these things, or you just finally got comfortable. Now it's like, oh, now I need to figure out how to pee in bed. So if you aren't able to do that, then you get a catheter put through your urethra so your bladder is drained into a bag for you. You might not have known that. And that, once the numbness wears off and you're post-birth and everything, and that's removed, like soreness, and you might have an increased risk of infection, because anything that's, invasive and internal increases your risk each time for more infection. It's the same with how many vaginal exams you get. The more of those you get, especially after your waters have ruptured, just the increased correlation of infection. And then she goes over that in her book as well. So yes, that goes into the bottom line. It's the risks and benefits. So she talks about the procedure intervention, kind of like demystifies it, gives a little idea of what it is and what it's like, because you might not get that information, because a lot of the times providers come from this realm of no, like they already know it, so they might have assumed knowledge. That's what it is. They come from this like perspective of assumed knowledge, that they might forget that you might not know anything about what this procedure might look like and what it is, because we'll see. And she's mentioned here, and then I've seen also through my own research and my own experiences, there's a really common occurrence of, I wouldn't have done this if I knew this was going to happen, or this was a risk, or I would feel this way, or X, Y, and Z. It's being presented as informed consent and informed choice, but it's not, because you're then having this really common occurrence of, if I would have known X, Y, or Z, I wouldn't have done this. I wouldn't have chosen this. And then you have this feeling of like betrayal and being lied to and taken advantage of, because you're like, I didn't get all the information. And now I did this thing that I'm really not happy with. And it's being posed like it was my choice, and it really wasn't. I wasn't really given the opportunity to make an informed choice. So she's trying to do that with describing the procedure and intervention, and then her bottom line is those risk benefits, the pros and cons. And she then closes with gleanings from the medical literature, because she does do the research. She is looking at medical literature, studies that have been done, evidence-based research, and she's drawing from that, and she summarizes like the headlines of each that support what she talked about during the main body of the chapter. So it's really good if you just want a quick look at it, so you don't have to read the whole thing. If you're a little crunched for time, or you're maybe close to being due or making a decision, you can go to that page and just look at the bulleted points of VBEC is safe, or cesarean does have an increased risk of infection, and so does vaginal exams, each one you get. So it's kind of just giving you these highlights. And then what I like in the appendices is that she has literature summaries written out. So it's a decent sized book, but it's not so big to have the full extent of all of the literature that she's read fully copied here. That's not really how people do when they are writing about something, because that's a different type of writing. It's usually more academic. And the literature summary is that she has read the study, she summarizes it, and she's citing the different ones, and she has really helpful graph comparisons across multiple studies to show these trends. It's her own like little collection of data that's just like, oh, this is evidence-based, and this isn't. Lovely. It's giving you the power to go as deep as you want. So maybe the chapter is enough from you and just the highlights from the medical literature is good. Or you want a little bit more before you make a decision, so you go to the back of the appendices and read the literature summaries for each chapter that you're interested in. And then she also has those cited that you can then go, if you want, and find the original study that was done and read that if you would like. It's as in-depth as you want to go. But she wants to make it accessible, and she has. This isn't overly bogged down in jargon. She's really good at explaining things and making it digestible and easier to approach, because I like one of the things that I've read before that wasn't Henci Goer. It was from Helping Hands. But thinking versus intelligence, it often gets switched back and forth, but it's different. Like, you can have a high baseline intelligence of, like, your IQ and stuff. And that has its pros and cons and things when it comes to thinking. Thinking is a learned behavior. You can have any IQ and be able to think. To a certain degree, I'm sure. But the average IQ and up, You are able to think because you compare and contrast, and you try to get more than just like, oh, I felt this, or I heard this from somebody else. Like, you are willing to like look through your options and weigh them out before making a decision. That's a behavior. And sometimes highly intelligent people might have a lot more assumptions and reliance on their intelligence that they disregard certain data and information that they could have learned and like thought through. So I think it's really important to emphasize that just because it says a Thinking Woman Guide, it doesn't mean that you need to have a college degree or be proficient in academic writing and reading academic writing, because this is meant to be approachable from just about any like learning level. A high schooler should be able to read this and be like, oh, these are my options. Hopefully they're not relevant in high school because, teen pregnancy, it's a whole other slew of things that I'm sure I'll talk about later on. But it's supposed to be something that you can use as a resource for the everyday person who's going through birth. So I really like that you can go as in-depth as you want, but the baseline is like just very approachable, very down to earth. It has a touch of sass, because it feeds my soul. And I just see like just a little bit of sass, because it's frustrating. Because she's frustrated when she's seeing this literature from the 80s that she's publishing at almost the turn of the century, the turn of millennia, to 2000. She's writing in 1999. She's seeing research from the 80s, and she's just like, why are we still doing this? And then me as a birth worker in 2021, seeing her writing from 1999, going, why are we still doing this? So yeah, the sass feeds me. I hope it feeds you too. So a lot of these things, but I think what's important that is a part of this in some of those later chapters where it talks about doulas, it talks about what provider to get and where to birth, is that she's not just like knocking these interventions. So she's giving you the information, the risks and benefits, because they might be appropriate, they might not. And she tries to give you indicators of when it is appropriate. And she's also giving you the tools to how to avoid them. She's like, well, if you don't want a cesarean, like here's how to do it. Here's some things that'll help. One of them might be a doula. One is picking a provider that doesn't have a high cesarean rate or a high transfer for cesarean rate. And also where you give birth. Hospital, birth center, a birth center that's not attached to a hospital, a home birth, like what your options are. And trying to give you these tools, like I've been doing as well, to give you this information, the evidence that supports it, and then also choices. And it's like, and here are evidence-based choices. That if you don't want to do X, Y, or Z, you might want to try these 3 things instead. Here are some tools. And if it turns out you do need to have a hospital birth with an obstetrician, like maybe try a doula to help reduce the chances of these interventions, or to at least reduce the chances of feeling unheard and neglected or abused and traumatized, all these things. I was just listening to a birth trauma podcast, and it's just like, it's 2021, it's still relevant. There's still things that are happening, and one of the ways to do it, in which this is how Henci Goer has done it as a birth activist is through the power of knowledge and educating parents, and then educating birth workers who are willing to read her work. These are what the evidence is showing, and these are the things that we need to change. Oh, I just saw my blog because I'm reading through my notes, and it's like, I particularly enjoyed how her research debunks a lot of myths that providers may use as justifications for intervention, such as, we're a high-risk hospital, so our cesarean rates are going to be higher. And she's like, I look at national hospital statistics, and they show that the rates to be wildly inconsistent whether the hospital is considered high risk or not. It has to do more with the birth philosophy of the providers and of that hospital. I had to write a paper for my midwifery studies based on the book, and I kind of took it in this different direction because I just kept seeing like this information where it was like, the birth philosophy really matters. It's not just like your birth location and your provider and if you have a doula or not for birth support. It's also all those components of your birth team, like their birth philosophy. Like, do they believe you can birth physiologically, naturally on your own, your body, your baby, more than capable? Or is it your body is dangerous and needs to be saved and fixed, and that your baby needs to be saved and potentially fixed because your body is so dangerous? And it was just so frustrating seeing that there are these like trends that, like, even with midwives, you might have someone who's more medicalized and who is more fear-based and doing things that aren't evidence-based. Same with doctors, and it was showing that there's like this correlation between the proximity to an obstetrician provider who has this like management model of care that the body is dangerous and the baby needs saved from your body, that midwives that have birth center in hospital birth centers have similar rates. Like, they're a little bit better with like less interventions and cesareans, but like it's like the closer you are to a hospital and to an obstetrician that has like these birth philosophies, your trends tend to match it. There was even one where it was physicians coming to a new hospital, so they had their own base rate of like a 15% cesarean rate, which is still a little too high. Going to a hospital, and then within the first year, their cesarean rates rose to like 22%, 1999, 22%, to raise and match the private physicians that were already in that hospital. So it's like this peer pressure and birth culture of the environment you're in affects your birth philosophy and like the way you conduct birth. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind, because it is like, yes, you'll have more high-risk patients at a high-risk hospital, but that's not the main thing causing these high cesarean rates, because there are high-risk hospitals that have low cesarean rates. So why are you guys different? If direct comparison of high-risk hospitals, why are there such a disparity between? And I think birth philosophy and all the other components that she goes into, there's things like money, there's things like litigation, there's all those different layers and stuff, and it's just prevailing birth culture that needs to be adjusted. But it's gonna take time, obviously, because she's been working on it since 1999, before even, because she had 2 books before then, and it's just like, yes. So a little bit more about Henci Goer, because like I mentioned, she's written other books before, The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth. She's written Obstetric Myths versus Research Realities, as well as Optimal Care in Childbirth, the Case for a Physiologic Approach, which won the American College of Nurse Midwives Best Book of the Year award. It's awesome. So she's an award-winning medical writer and an internationally known speaker who advocates for evidence-based maternity care and is a birth advocate. And part of that advocacy is that she's a founder, director, and faculty member of Childbirth U, the letter U, a website offering narrated slide lectures at modest cost to help pregnant parents make informed decisions and obtain optimal care for themselves and their babies. So that's what she's doing as a birth advocate. It's this providing of information, of resources, so you can make informed choices. She's not making them for you. Like, yes, she'd like the national cesarean rate to go down. She really does. And so does the World Health Organization. And so do midwives. It's like, we want those to go down. But she's not going to tell you what to do. She's going to provide you the resources, the information for you to decide on your own. And that leads into, as well, all of this to this mission that she started with others in the birth world, the Mother-Friendly Childbirth Initiative, the first consensus initiative of the Coalition for Improving Maternity Services. And she's got a copy of it in the back of the book, and I'm going to have it posted on my website at some point too, within its own separate blog, to really talk about it, because it is kind of being a proponent of the midwifery model of care, because that is how you achieve a mother-friendly childbirth initiative. And she also mentions she has 10 steps to do it, but also cites the World Health Organization and UNICEF's 10 steps of a baby-friendly hospital initiative. So it's both, because I know that was a big one, trying to make things more baby-friendly, and then we were, again, forgetting the mother and the birthing person, the parents. And so it was combining both of these and how, like, they feed each other. We get better outcomes for birthing people and babies by doing very similar things. So this was a little meandering. I tried not to get ranty, so I apologize if I did, but these interventions do get me heated up, because we are seeing them still very common and prevalent, even when there was evidence against them that did not support them as common standard practice in 1999. So yes, I would recommend The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth by Henci Goer for anyone who is expecting or thinks they will be expecting. And especially if you are on the fence on what kind of birth you want. If you're already really informed, you might enjoy reading it to get just like a refresher. But if you really aren't familiar with the birth process and your options, this is a really great starting point. Super accessible. The chapters are clearly marked, so if you're really curious about an epidural or types of pain medication, there's a chapter for it, and you can go look at those specifically. And again, like I stated with thinking versus intelligence, like, you don't have to be a genius to read this and understand it, and you don't have to be a genius to be informed about your healthcare choices, and so you can make an informed choice, because we shouldn't be treating you like a child who doesn't know better or know how to make the best choices for them, because you're an adult and this is your body, your baby, your family. It's your choice. So you need to be given the resources and the education and information to make those informed choices, because it's yours. It's not the provider's. The provider is not your parent. So I really recommend this for birthing people who are expecting, especially who want more information, who don't have it already, and for any of the ones who don't know what their options are. And this is a really great starting point, because I know sometimes, especially like the more analytical partner might be like, well, the doctors say this and they have all this study. It's like, yeah, well, we're seeing evidence here from people who do research and studies and like evidence-based research that doesn't mean that they're right all the time. So if you're a birth worker, I also recommend this, because yes, it's from 1999, but it's still relevant, and I think it's really important to have it as a refresher, or to have it as just like a reminder too of this is still needed, we still have work to do. And it's also a nice resource to give to your clients. And again, like with the easy citing of the chapters, I think it's really awesome. So yeah, I definitely recommend The Thinking Woman's Guide to a Better Birth by Henci Goer. If there's any birth books, women's health books, or childbearing years or parenting books you guys want me to review, like, definitely drop them below. And what is your favorite birth book, or parenting or childbirth book? Because I would love to add it to my list. Until next time, happy birthing. Oh, and also, like, share, subscribe, and follow. I always forget to do that, I feel. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and I have my website, jbdoula.com. But the other handles are at jbdoula or at bjbdoula services. So yes, like, share, follow, subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks so much. Happy birthing.